Today I'm going to demonstrate a CARS morning routine. This is something that you can follow along at home. It's going to take about 7 or so minutes. We're going to take each joint through a full pain-free range of motion, 2 repetitions in each direction. So put your phone down, put your laptop on the side, and follow along. First, let's start with our neck. Bring our chin down to our chest. Then slowly scrape along the left side of our collarbone as far as we can. Slowly tilt our chin towards the sky. Lean forward, drop that ear down. Swivel across, bring your chin back down to your collarbone, and back. Let's do it again. So, rotate left, side bend, chin to the ceiling, side bend, rotating, bring back to the midline, and come up. Chin back down again, scraping along the right side as far as we can, side bend, rotate to the other side, side bend, rotate, chin along the collarbone, rotate, side bend, chin towards the ceiling, side bend, rotate, chin back down, and return back. Next, our thoracic spine. Start by giving yourself a self-hug. Flex your upper back, your mid-back, flexing the start of your lower back, rotating left, side bend, chest up to the ceiling, side bend, rotate, coming back to the midline, and a second time, rotate, side bend, chest to the ceiling, side bend, rotating, coming back to the midline, and back. As we do this, we're taking each joint through a full pain-free range of motion. You should start to develop sensations. You can start to become a little bit more self-aware of what range of motions feel more comfortable or what range of motions might feel uncomfortable for you. Write those down, write them in a little notepad and say, this range of motion, scapular flexion, or thoracic extension, or glenohumeral extension, whatever the range of motion is, start to make notes and say, oh, or at this point of the video, it started to feel just a little uncomfortable. These are things that we can use to then turn a morning routine into a bit of a self-assessment as to what joints you might, you should consider putting a little bit more focus on for your exercise regimen. Okay, opposite direction, flexing. Rotating right, rotating, coming back, and down. Rotating right, side bend, extending, side bend, and rotating, coming back down to the midline. Next, let's do our shoulder. Externally rotate, scoop in, bring yourself into maximal shoulder flexion. Internally rotate, bringing your arm away into shoulder extension and return back to the midline. Back into the other direction, keeping your palm facing away from you. Extension, rotating around, swiveling up and extending down. One more time. As you do this, try and be aware that you're not hiking your shoulder in order to get extra range of motion. Try and make sure that you're also not side bending at your spine or maybe moving a little bit at your hips just to cheat extra range of motion. We're trying to just take each individual joint through a full pain-free range of motion. We don't want those other joints to kind of sneak in. We're asking your shoulder to be a shoulder. We're not asking your hip to pretend to be a shoulder. Next, shoulder, external rotation, adduction into flexion, internal rotation to the abduction zone and extension, reversing. Something that's great about this is you can do this in the morning. You can also do this at the nighttime. You can also change what positions you choose to do this in. You can do this standing, you can do this kneeling, or if there's a sport-specific position that is important for you, maybe while holding a squat. practicing some sort of a hip hinge position, you can also do that. Next, let's move over into our elbows. Flex up, pronate, extend, and supinate. 2 repetitions in each direction. Changing directions. And if you're choosing to do this as a morning routine, I'd recommend maybe having some light body tension around the joints that are not moving, just to enforce that the only joint that is moving is the one that we're intending. How you can do that is pretend like you're bracing for a punch, or the structures around your joint. Let's switch sides. The structure that is anything that is not called the elbow, whether it's your shoulder, your scapula, your spine. Just tense that just a little bit, maybe at an intensity 2 out of 10 intensity, 3 out of 10, 30% intensity. Let's switch sides. Pronation, flexion, supination, and extension. Next, we'll do our scapula. Bring one arm roughly shoulder height. And the motion that we're going to do, protract forward, elevate up, retract backwards, and depress down. 2 repetitions in each direction. Changing directions. This also gives you an opportunity to give yourself some more experience working in your end ranges in a safe manner. You may consider training in end ranges with some of the resistance exercises that you do. Switch sides. You may consider training in end ranges at the positions that you do, but when we work at these end ranges, we often don't need more than just our body weight, or maybe a couple of pounds, to really get a lot of benefit training in our end range. This can also be complementary to the introduction. Let's switch sides. Depression. Switch directions. Depression, retraction, elevation, protraction. This can also give us a great introduction to training or working, exploring our workspace in our end ranges if we have not otherwise thought about that. Next is your wrist. I'd recommend putting something like a phone or a block or something just on your wrist, just to keep the wrist, or put it on your forearm just to keep the wrist cars strict and honest. So for the wrist, the movements are in, down, out, and up. Adduction to extension, abduction to flexion. Changing directions. You don't have to do a closed fist, you can do an open palm, but I'd recommend whatever hand position you choose to try and not move that at all during the motion, because after all, we're trying to move only our wrist in full pain-free range of motion. The more that we start to involve other joints, the more compensation that will start to occur. Changing directions. And is compensation bad? Well, if we're trying to test the capacity for individual articulations, and we start to assess individual articulations that have shown a lot of compensations, switching directions, we're kind of taking that information and making it just a little bit cloudy. It's hard to assess how well our wrist moves if we're allowing our elbow and our shoulder to be involved in the movement. Then we're kind of making judgments on that. Next is our hip. I'd recommend holding onto a dowel, a broomstick, the wall, or something just to keep yourself sturdy. Start with externally rotating, bringing yourself up into hip flexion like a hacky sack position. Bring your leg out. Take your ankle and scoop it away from you into internal rotation. Bring yourself into extension and back. Extension, externally rotating, bringing yourself back to the midline and back. one more repetition. What this is also doing is this is starting to teach our joints how to move well within isolation, because doing a squat will get you better at doing a squat, but practicing a squat does not necessarily get your hip better at functioning like a human hip. Switching sides. For example, you may perform a squat, but you may have a deficit in internal rotation or some other movement. And if you can take the movements, the individual movements that you have a deficiency in, that will start to carry over into the performance of the exercises or the sports that you do. So working on getting better in how our joints function and move in isolation does not have to conflict with the training that you already do. It can work to complement it. Go back to the midline and back. Next is our spine, starting at our hip. We're going to segmentally extend one vertebrae at a time until we reach our upper thoracic region. And then once again, start from that hip, segmentally flex one vertebrae at a time until we get to the upper spine. As we start this motion, hands under knees, knees under hips. Create some tension by pulling your hands and your knees closer together, creating some isometric tension into the floor. Extending at the hips, moving to the lumbar spine, upper lumbar, to the thoracic, mid and upper thoracic, and our neck goes last. Now again, segmenting into flexion, push our hands and our feet away from each other. This repetition should last anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10 seconds. We want to really explore what aspects of our spine are moving individually and what aspects of our spine are moving in blocks. Because when we start to have parts of our spine that move in blocks, that's where we start to have some movement limitations that could affect our performance. Starting with our knee, hook under, point towards the sky, chest up. Picture like we're going to draw a rectangle with our toes. So externally rotating, extending, internally rotating, and flexing. We're trying to get this motion at our tibia and not from our ankle. One more time. Switch sides. Internal rotating, extending, external rotating, and flexing. Switching sides. Go out and up, in and down. Also, the more that you gain experience in training joints in isolation, it becomes easier to assess movement discrepancy, right versus left, or particular asymmetries. Now, asymmetries are not inherently bad. It's going to be impossible to be 100% symmetrical on each side, but if you start to notice large discrepancies, that can be an area, an opportunity to say, okay, let's close the gap. Let's try and tackle this. Next, let's do the ankle. Hug your leg really close to your chest, so then your foot is not going to be tempted to touch the floor. Go in, down, out, and up. In, down, out, and up. Switching directions. Out, down. This can feel so great for some of us who maybe aren't doing this very often. This This can really be a wake-up call for a lot of people who wear construction boots or something similar all day. Switching sides. In, down, out, and up. Inversion, plantar flexion, eversion, dorsiflexion. Reversing. See how I was starting to rotate there. I was starting to compensate a little. Finally, let's end on the toes. Let's do a quick toe drill to the best of your ability. Keep your 4 toes on the ground and exclusively lift your big toe up. Hold for a couple seconds. 2, 1. Do it one more time. 2, 1. Now keeping your big toe down and raising your 4 toes up. 2, 1. Second time. 2, 1. Let's try keeping every toe up and only tapping down that big toe. 1, 2. Keeping everything up and only tapping the 4 toes. You might start to see that big toe is going to try to be involved a little bit. And now, let's end on piano toes, keeping all our 4. Now let's end on piano toes. All toes up, and try and drop your pinky toe all the way to your big toe, segmenting one at a time, and coming up. This one is going to be hard. It's not going to look perfect, but this can really just be a wake-up call of, hey, I thought my ankles maybe moved a little bit better than they do. Now, it's not bad. If you aren't able to do this now, it's just an opportunity to learn more about yourself, an opportunity to increase your physical literacy. Changing sides. Lifting only your big toe. 1, 2. 1, 2. Only your 4 toes. 2. 1, 2. Lifting all 5 toes and tapping just that big toe. 1, 2. Tapping the 4. Now let's end on that piano toes. All toes up. Dropping that pinky all the way down to our big toe. Lifting up in reverse. This one is a real tough one. It really tests that mind-body connection. You're like, I'm telling you to move. Why aren't you listening to me? Thank you for watching, and I hope you participated in the full body curls routine. If you liked it, please leave it in the comments. And actually, if you did participate, I'd actually really like to see what area did you actually find harder than you expected? Was it that part where we were going into shoulder flexion, transitioning into internal rotation? Was that harder than expected? Or was there something in the ankle or something in the spine? Let me know what area or what joint you thought was actually a little harder than you thought. Okay, I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.